All right, get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Monique Dumais, and I'm a member of the Hampshire Bird Club and also the Education Committee. And I'd like to also introduce Katie, and she can give you a background on herself, who is co-presenting.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I am currently a PhD student at UMass, and I like to go birding, and I also like to study birds as part of my research. So I'm into animal behavior and neuroscience, and so my dissertation specifically is focusing on using songbirds in order to study how experience affects song categorization in the brain. And so I'm doing this both with wild swamp sparrows out of the Quabbin and other marshy areas around Amherst and Northampton, as well as with a captive colony of zebra finches that we have in the lab. And I know that some folks sometimes are interested in hearing some of the things that people research at UMass. And so I'll just tell you a little bit about the two labs that I'm in as well. So I'm in a neuroscience lab that studies how hormones affect how the brain perceives sound. And I'm also in a more behavioral ecology related lab that studies wild birds and focuses on things like sexual selection and mate choice. And so I'm happy to talk about any of those other specific research things if anybody wants. But our topic today of female birdsong is not specifically what I actually study, although I've read a lot about it, and I'm still happy to share some of what I know with you today.
All right, excellent, Katie. Thank you for the introduction. I think what we can do first is start with a group discussion and give you a little bit of a challenge on what female birds do sing in our area. So Katie, I believe we have a poll for everyone to try.
Yeah. So I'm going to share a poll on your screen. It's just going to be a pop-up, and it's going to be a multiple choice question. You can select multiple options. And so just tell us which of these species of songbirds you think the female sings in addition to the male. So we'll give you a few minutes to get that started. All right, we almost have everybody submitted, just a few more yet. All right, we're almost at everybody. So keep thinking about your answers, but I'm going to show you what everybody thought so far. So you should be able to see the results now of what everybody said. So it looks like nobody was fooled with the none of the above option. So that's good. And all right, so let's go through these. So really, you should have checked all of the boxes except for none of the above, as I just told you, and except white-breasted nuthatch. So white-breasted nuthatches do not have female song. And then the only other one that you may not have wanted to check is the blue jay. So we're not actually sure on blue jays yet, although it's a good guess to say that blue jays do have female song, given some other jay species do. But all of these other species on this list, you should have checked. So we wanted to talk a little bit about kind of how you folks are approaching your birding. So what kinds of things are you paying attention to when you go out birding? And especially if you hear someone singing, what's your first thought? Does anybody want to share?
Ask Merlin.
Unmute your mic and speak.
My first thought is to ask Merlin.
Okay, thank you, Sally. Somebody else?
Mine is to listen to the loudness of the song and the pitch of the song.
Okay, thanks, Carol. Someone else?
I had a catbird singing today, and all I could do was be overwhelmed. That, I don't know, guy, gal, it just completely taking up all the airspace there was.
Thank you, Mary Alice. Someone else? Okay, back to you, Katie.
Cool. So how many of you can even think to yourself, this can be a rhetorical question. When you think to yourself that you hear a song, are you only trying to identify what species it is, or are you also thinking, I wonder if that's the male or the female? For a lot of you, I bet you either don't even think about it at all, or you're just assuming that it's the male. Am I right for some of you? Well, then it's a good thing that you are here today, because we're going to talk to you about really the prevalence of song in females. Do you have any other thoughts to add to that, Monique?
No, I think we captured everything. I think hopefully that people will have at the end of this workshop more realization on how to go about starting to break apart those songs between the male and the female. But I think you captured everything, Katie. Absolutely. And just to preview what we're going to talk about while you're out there birding, it's not super easy to tell who you're listening to either, whether it's male versus female, because in a lot of cases, female song really hasn't been studied in many of these species yet. And so we just don't really know exactly how the males and females sound differently. And so another thing that, is a little bit of a barrier is that if you're using things like Merlin or just your own ears, they probably can't tell the difference yet. So you almost have to see the bird, right? Okay, so let's just go ahead and first make sure that we're all on the same page here. So when we talk about a song, we mean something very specific. So of course, all birds have some sort of vocalization, right? So all birds make sounds, and that's males and females. But in a lot of species, those vocalizations are what we call calls. So things like a goose honking or a duck quacking, those are calls. And those tend to be short and simple, and usually just one or a couple syllables. But when we're talking about songs, these are things that are longer and more complex with a bunch of different notes, and they often sound like this nice melody. And oftentimes, interestingly enough, those songs are actually learned. So most of these songbirds actually learn how to sing their songs, just like you and I learn how to speak our human languages. And so
what we're talking about here when we talk about songbirds are all of those perching birds, things like warblers, sparrows, cardinals, chickadees. And those are all of the ones that learn their songs. And then flycatchers sing as well, but there's a little bit less evidence about them learning their songs. But again, these are all still examples of types of birds that we're talking about with song in particular.
Then there's some statistics as well. And if you look back in 2016, there was a study of more than a sample of 1,000 songbird species from around the world. 64% of those songbirds, the females sing, and some sing on a regular basis, you know, either regularly or in the breeding season. And in North America, nearly 150 songbird species have females that sing. So they are out there in North America. I'll hand it right back to you, Katie. Oh, it's actually my slide, actually. So a little bit here, I wanted to share with you on this. There is some history with recording birds. And I found this really interesting that the first recording, known field recording, was by Ludwig Koch. He was 8 years old in 1889 and captured an Indian Sharma, which those are what the birds look like, both the male and the female. And it was at the Frankfurt Zoo. Now, what's interesting about Ludwig Koch is that he eventually becomes the godfather of birdsong and did a lot of recording, especially of bird songs as he got older in the 1920s in Britain. And a lot of his work is online, and you can take a look at that and listen to his interviews and to his songs. And then, so that was on what you see is the pictures in Edison. It was done on a wax cylinder. And so that instrument was the one that he used. And he said his father gave that to him. So he experimented with that. And then the first gramophone recording was in England of a nightingale by Carl Reitz in 1910. And then as we started getting into the latter part of the 1920s, they started capturing birds that were synchronized on audio and film. And that was captured in Ithaca, New York. And there was a bunch of birds that they captured, but a few of them were rose-breasted grosbeak and the song sparrow. Now, Arthur Allen and Peter Paul Kellogg of Cornell University set the basis of that, which became all the libraries that you're capturing with Macaulay Library. That set the basis of that of Cornell University. So as time went on, as we started getting into the 1940s, the first reel-to-reel magnetic tape recorder was captured by Sture Palmer of Guillemots and Razorbills in Sweden in the island of Gotland. Now, as time went on in the 60s, recording instruments started to get much more easier to find. They were smaller, and by the time you hit the 1980s, digital audio tape, and then eventually as we got into the 2000s, digital recordings were much more easier. Now you can use it with a cell phone and with apps. So the point is that when we first started to explore bird songs in the 1880s, the equipment was very cumbersome. It was very difficult to use. It was hard for people to get that equipment out there. And some of this equipment was noisy, so it would scare the birds. Very difficult to try to get a bird song. So as time went on, and now you have cell phones, it's much easier to capture that. You have apps that can help you identify some of the bird songs. But it is possible that when we started capturing all these bird songs, that they weren't male, they were female. It is quite possible. So highlights of recording birds, we've come a long way, but it's possible that a lot of those bird songs might have been misallocated to a male instead of a male bird. You know, the male bird was allocated to that and it should have been a female bird. All right, next slide.
Yeah, thanks, Monique. So really, as she was just saying, she's absolutely right. You know, we could have missed a whole bunch of birds that we do have female song recordings, but the reality is the ones that we know are females up at this point is really low. And so even though we've had this gradual increase in the ability to record songs and just outside, you know, nature sounds in general, this has really increased since like about the 50s. So the 50s is when people started to really research things. Kind of before that, it was more of you know, these naturalists are just out there documenting things, and really serious research kind of started around the 50s or 60s, as Monique said, when it started becoming a little bit easier to, you know, take things out into the field. And so in the last, you know, 70 years, you would think, wow, we must have recorded so many different sounds of nature, and we have. But as Monique was saying, unfortunately, we don't really know how much of it is female songs. And the ones that we know are female songs are low. And so, for example, if you were to look here at two of the larger databases where we store our audio recordings, these have species that aren't just birds, but mainly birds. So the Macaulay Library, of course, is run by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, which is the same entity that is in charge of eBird and the Merlin app and things like that. And then Xenocanto is another really great place that people can upload their recordings. And if you look at the darkest bars, you can see that, wow, we really do have a lot of recordings. And this is specifically just bird songs. So there's a whole lot of other recordings on there, but bird songs in particular, you know, we have hundreds of thousands of these, and that's awesome. But if you look at the ones that are labeled either male or female, you can see that there's this really huge disparity. There's a whole lot more that are labeled as male than there are labeled as female. And this is even the case in species where we can tell the difference between males and females just by looking at them. So in cardinals, males and females look different. And so it's fairly easy to tell if you can see the bird singing, which sex it is. And so we do have a fairly large sample of female cardinal songs, and that's awesome, but there's still a whole lot more male songs. But then there's an even bigger disparity when it comes to other species where the males and females look the same. So here, for example, is the house wren. And as you can see, we have hardly any recordings where we know that it's a female singing, even though female house wrens do sing. And this is not necessarily anyone's fault, because of course you can't tell whether it's a male or female just by looking, but this is something that you know, further increases that disparity. And then the other thing, in fact, the fairly interesting thing, I think, is just the fact that we have so many recordings that are even attributed to either males or females, given that you can't tell just by looking at them. So what I think and others have said is really happening here is that these folks who are uploading these house wren recordings are just assuming that they're males and marking them down as males, even though really they probably don't know for sure. And so it's pretty unfortunate that that's how, you know, these things happen. And so as of 2018, if you first look on the left here, out of the almost 6,000 different songbird species, we only actually have information about 27% of them as far as whether the female in that species sings or not. And so that means that 73% of songbird species, we don't even know, and we're not sure. And most of those remaining undocumented species are species where the male and female look alike, and so it's really hard to know who is singing. Or they live in the tropics where it's much harder to go. They live in these dense rainforests, or they're a place that it takes a lot of money to get to and time to get to. And so they're just the ones that are harder to study. But this has really left us with a whole lot we just don't know. But of the species that we do know, so again, 27% or thereabouts, we do have information on. Out of those, now if you look at the pie chart on the right, this is how many species that we know of have female song versus how many we know for sure don't. And so of those documented species, it's actually pretty clear that the majority of them do have female song. And so that's really awesome. And so kind of to further drive this home for you, I know there's a lot going here, but this is a large phylogenetic tree, which means that it's just showing the relatedness of all of the songbird species. And so that's what all of the lines are. And really, I just want you to focus on the colors that are around the outside rim. So the red are the species where female song is present, and the blue dots are the species where song is not present in females. And so there's a lot more red, right? Meaning that there's a lot more species where females sing. And because people have kind of done this analysis to look at the relatedness of all of the birds and where female song is present in different species versus other species, researchers think that the very first ancestor, so going back millions of years, so the very first songbird was probably one where the females were singers. And so that means that female song is this really old ancestral state in these birds. And so this brings us a little bit further to maybe consider, so if female song is so common, then why is it that people think that only the males are the ones that are singing? And there's a few reasons for this potential bias. So the first one is this assumption that songs in birds have evolved because of sexual selection, specifically on males. So it is true that in many species in the animal kingdom, the females are what we consider the choosy sex, and the males are the ones that are competing to win the female's affection and the right to mate with her. And this has to do with things like the fact that the female usually puts in more effort into the reproductive time, because she, especially in birds, is the one that's creating the egg inside of her. And then she spends most of the time sitting on it and feeding the babies in a lot of species. And so females tend to be busy during the breeding season, raising babies. Whereas a lot of times males don't help with the offspring, and they're out trying to continue and find more mates. And so that means if there are less females at any given time who are available to mate, the one or a few females who are available should have their pick of all of the males. And so this, in theory, would drive the males to be really showy and flashy. And so that's why and how we get some of the really bright colors, for example, in a lot of the birds that we really love, like the bright cardinal. And also that's how, one of the ways, at least, that we have these really elaborate songs that birds sing. But really, songs have multiple functions other than mate choice. And so this isn't the only story that's going on here. And so some females do sing as well. So what other reasons are there for this bias? Well, another thing is where the research was being done. So back in the latter half of the 1900s, and especially even before that, most of these recordings and research on songbirds were being done in temperate regions. You had these researchers and birders from Europe and in North America and the United States especially, going out and trying to document what they had there and looking around at the natural world. And the reality is that in temperate zones, a smaller proportion of the songbird species that we have here have female song. Most of the species that have female song are actually in the tropics. And so, of course, we were missing that when all those people were only looking in the temperate regions. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about why the tropics in just a bit. But again, that's another piece of this bias story. And then another piece of this bias was also just who was doing the research itself. So you had all of these males specifically who were going out and doing the research and documenting these species. And so, for example, here, this is Peter Marler, who is considered one of the most influential researchers who started the field of songbird research. And no offense to him, I've heard very good things about him. He's a nice guy, I'm sure. I never met him, but I've heard good things. You know, he was a white dude out there looking at the birds. And in any case, in any industry that you might be in, if you just have one type of person who has one type of perspective on the world doing the work, then you don't have these other ideas floating around, such as, you know, oh, maybe we should actually see what the females are doing. So just the idea never really even you know, popped up, and the focus was on other things. And so it was just missed. But there's good news, because today we have a lot more women who are doing research on songbirds, and specifically women are the ones who are leading this charge on female songbird research. So here, if you look on the left, this was a study that they looked at who was publishing on these different topics. So if you were looking at a scientific research paper that I think these were from the last about 20 years. So if you're looking at a research paper that was on just the general topic of birdsong, things are split sort of 50-50 as far as men and women first authors, although a few more men. And that's still somewhat of the case. There's of course a lot of men in research. And so that's fairly typical. But if you look on the left, now just specifically at the papers where the focus was female song, this is really striking. So 68% of those papers have women who are our first authors. And so again, this is another case where women are coming in and finding those unasked questions and those new things to explore. And so because female song is really only taking off in the last 10 to 12 years, with the surge of females that we're now getting into the field, this is one of the open topics of study that they're really taking the charge on. And so this is a really cool story that's happening here. Okay, so we've told you that females sing, but why? Why do the females sing? So there's a few the few reasons that this might be. And so one is for mutual territory defense. And so males and females will both sing from perches on the borders of their territories to basically broadcast to other birds that are nearby, hey, this is my turf, so stay away. If you come over here, I'm going to chase you out, kind of a deal. And so it's a broadcasting of their space. So this is kind of like, you know, mammals scent marking their territory. Birds do it with sound. So another thing is pair bonding. So a lot of species, the male and female will sing together or one after another. Sometimes they specifically have these well-coordinated duets that they do together. And this is to help them form a bond together. So if they're going to be raising chicks together, they need to make sure that they're in sync and that they have a strong bond. And so singing together is one of the ways that they do that. And then the other thing is to potentially initiate the timing of mating with their partner. And so the male and female might sing for these reasons. Now, this goes back to kind of why we think a lot more females are singing in the tropics because of things like this. So in the tropics, they have much longer breeding seasons and they can breed almost year round. And they also tend to hold territories year round because they don't migrate like many of our species do here. And so for those reasons, it becomes even more important in the tropics to make sure that you have that year-long bond with another individual and to make sure that you are still defending that territory year-round. And then also, because the breeding season's so long, you need to make sure that your bodies are on the right hormonal schedule to get ready to mate and do that thing when that breeding season is so long. And so these are some of the reasons why we think, but aren't quite sure yet, why there are more female song birds in the tropics. But of course, because female song is still fairly understudied, these things are mostly theories at this point. So that's a little bit about why some females do sing. But now the question is, I just told you earlier that the ancestral female songbird was probably one that sang. And so why do we have some species today where the female doesn't sing? And so this is also kind of something that's coming back from various observations that scientists have had over the years. So there was a researcher in Australia who were studying these beautiful birds here. So these are called superb fairy wrens. And the female's on the left, she's a nice cream or brown color. And the male has this really bright head and shoulders. It's almost like an iridescent blue and really contrasty black pattern. And the female and the male both sing in this species. And the scientists were observing that the male and female were using their songs differently. The males would tend to sing maybe near the nest, but never really close to it. And females would sometimes be singing while they were sitting on the nest itself. And so they thought that, maybe this could be kind of risky. They might actually be attracting predators to the nest, and maybe that's not such a great thing. And so what they did was they set up this experiment where they put out fake nests, and at some nests, they played female songs, and at other nests, they played songs from a small distance farther away from the nest. And sure enough, as you would expect, the fake nests that had the song playing from directly at the nest were predated more often. And so this leads us to the theory that we have currently, that really the reason that some songbirds, some females lost their song is just that it's dangerous. It's risky to be singing. It's really conspicuous. And so if you're going to be sitting on a nest trying to take care of your babies, you don't want to be broadcasting where you are to all of the predators that are around. And so this is just one of the thoughts that we have currently. And so now I've told you a lot about the fact that, hey, females sing, but what do they actually sound like? And how is this different from the male? And really the answer is it's going to depend on the species. And we don't even know necessarily a whole lot about this yet. We're still trying to look at what the females sound like. But for some of the ones that we do know, here are a few examples. So this first example here is, of course, the northern cardinal, our friends here. So I'm first going to play a fairly familiar song type that the male has. Whoop. Okay, so you've probably, sorry about that. You've probably heard that. And, you know, that's something you might hear every day, sometimes just out your window. And here is a female singing. So females, female cardinals have really similar sounding song types to males. So they sound really similar. But there are some other examples where they're not quite as similar. So for example, here are some barn swallows. So I'll play you the male's song first. He's here on the right. Okay. And then here is what a female song sounds like. Let me play that one again. So it's much shorter, right? So they generally have a similar form, but the male has that trill that's at the end. And also the females are shorter and they're a little bit more noisy with fewer different note types and things like that. And so there are definitely some marked differences between the barn swallows. And then this one, the red-winged blackbird here, is one of my favorites because I study swamp sparrows, so I spend a lot of time in the marsh. And this is a really familiar sound to me. So what you're going to hear in this sound file is first the familiar male singing his congaree song. And then immediately afterwards, the tut, 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 tut that you hear is the female responding to his song. So listen to this one. Did you catch that? So it's really fast at the end there. Yeah, so those short little tut, 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 tuts immediately following that male song is the female responding to him. So that's pretty cool. So it was really fun for me after I, realized that that's what was going on. So now every time I hear it, I think about, that dynamic between the male and the female. So those are a few examples of some songs. And so let's now do another quick poll to think about our female song recordings and also whether you can identify a female singing. So the first question is going to be asking you, of the 660 species that we have female songs or that we know females sing in, how many of those do we have a recording of a female? And then the second question is asking you to identify which warbler species is singing in this audio clip that I'm going to play for you. So again, this is a female warbler singing, and you're going to tell me which species you think it is. So I'm going to play that file for you now. All right, I will play that one more time for you. All right, so fill in those answers. Give a guess if you have no idea. This one is tough. I did put some similar sounding species on there, so don't feel bad if you have no idea. Just letting the answers roll in here. All right, we got most of you. So I'm going to show you what everybody said. So for question number 1, out of the 660 species with documented female birdsong, how many do we have a female song recording for? The most popular answer here was 200, and you were correct if you said 200. So that's fairly unfortunate, right? That means we only have recordings for about 1/3 of the species that have female birdsong. And so we're going to talk to you a little bit later about how you can potentially help get more recordings for us. And now number 2, which warbler species is this female songster in the audio file? So let me just play that one more time. All right, and the most popular answer here was black and white warbler, which is a good guess because they do sound pretty much like a black and white warbler, but that is incorrect. The second most popular answer, American redstart. If you said American redstart, give yourself a pat on the back. Congratulations. That was a female redstart singing. Awesome. So good job if you got those correct.
All right, Katie, thank you so much. So based on what we've talked about in this workshop, there's ways you can get started learning about female bird songs. And the first part of it is knowing which female birds sing. And we'll give you a list and we'll give you resources in a few minutes and learn their song. Either if you can record it or go to the Macaulay Library or just learn from other birders, learn their song and recognize them when birding. Try to understand, see if you can see them, take the time to try to break out if you can between the males and females, and consider participating with some of the groups that are working together to collect female bird songs. So those are the ways that you can get started. And we'll go to the next slide. We have some lists that you can get started here that we talked about. This can get you ready to look on your next birding trip, or if you're with other birders, and just look for those birds and see if you can see the female start to sing. If there's a female that you've identified, see if she is singing to you. They can speak. So that's a list for you and we'll have this list for you available. Next slide, please.
Monique,
Yes.
this is Janice. There is a question, it was earlier, but it fits this last slide. How do you distinguish what sex is singing? So if we're trying to figure out which one is that it's the female singing, I'd say, if I look at your last slide, like the titmouse, the mockingbird, it's not easy. As Ruth said, they're sexually monomorphic birds. I hope I asked your question correctly, Ruth.
I can answer some of that, some of it, and then Katie will probably give a better answer than myself, is in some cases, you can tell physically by the bird if you have a visual of that bird, you know, like the cardinal, for example. However, the challenge is if you can't see them, then it's sometimes hard to distinguish their sound. And in some cases, you know the sound, but you might not can distinguish them physically.
That's
So
correct.
do your research if you can, and it's practice, you know, going out there and really identifying and hearing what those different sounds are. When I started getting into breaking apart the males and the females, it's hard for me to sometimes even physically see them or distinguish them. But after a while, I started to understand their song and then tried to do some research to see what the differences are between the sounds of the male and the female. Katie, I don't know if you would like to jump in on this question too.
Yeah, you basically hit the main things. I mean, the best way would be to see it, and if it's a species where the male and female look different, then you're good. But if you can't see it and you're not familiar with how they might sound different, and in a lot of species, we don't really know how differently they sound yet. And in some species like the cardinal that I just showed you, they sound very similar. The best thing that you can do is just not mark it down as a male. Again, that's what a lot of people used to and probably still do, is they just assume that it's a male singing. And so if you can at least mark it as a song and not pick a sex, then that would be good. The only really other thing that you could do to distinguish the male from the female, if it's in a species where they look the same, is seeing the behavior. And so in some species, there are certain behaviors that are specific to the female or specific to the male. An obvious one would be, of course, if you can see them copulating, you would know which one's the male and which one's the female. But there's other things that might be specific to different species. So also just knowing what different behaviors the male might do versus the female, and then tracking which one is singing. And that's really all you can do.
Thank you very much.
Next slide, we're also, you know, to help you in your research, is there are websites and resources that you can also look up and get examples of what the sounds of the birds are. So there is in the Macaulay Library female bird songs of certain species. Female bird song itself, the first one on the slide, is an excellent slide, a site to go to that will talk about female bird songs, how you can contribute, how you can record. There's, like I talked about in earlier slides, along with Katie, is there's different recording capabilities. And you also, Katie has just put a resource list. If you copy this link, you can have that resource list to get you started. But there's various lists that you can do cross research and get familiar with those birds. Katie, anything to add to that? No. These are some articles too that were excellent as far as not only looking at why we didn't know female birds sing, that we talked about, and also how to record bird songs. And if some of you are not familiar with recording bird songs, there's an excellent beginner's guide by Audubon who can get you started with a lot of that.
Monique, we have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Jim, you want to unmute your mic and ask your question? Or not? He says the mic's broken. Okay. Jim's question is this: if a male/female is singing, and we see that male/female singing, can we assume the response, who we don't see, is from the opposite sex?
I can take that one. So the answer is no. And that's because oftentimes in territory defense, what happens is this thing called counter singing. And because males are the ones that generally are doing most of the counter singing, this has been studied mostly in males. And so what happens is male from territory A will be on his border and he'll sing his song. And then male from territory B will sing his song. And that's kind of them each saying like, yep, I'm over here. This is my spot. Okay, cool. I'm over here. This is my spot. Just don't come any closer. I know you're there, kind of a deal. And they're usually just singing back and forth like that. But sometimes if one of the birds feels like their neighbor is getting too close, they'll actually start to sing the same song type. So different bird species will have a few different similar sounding song types. They sound very similar to our human ear, but the birds can tell the differences. And matching the song type of your neighbor is a sign of an aggressive response. So you're escalating the response, and it's a sign that a fight might happen. But essentially, this counter singing is happening out there all the time. And so it could be a male responding to a male, but it could be a female responding to a male or vice versa. We just don't know. So can't make assumptions there. Good question.
Thank you.
Cool. So I see another question from Sally. Did you want to ask your question?
Sally Crawford?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes.
can.
Okay, I was wondering with the birds that you identified where the females definitely don't have song, how do you know that when it's so hard to study them and when it's so hard to tell sometimes? Like, how do you know that those definitively do not sing?
Yeah, that's a good question. So that basically comes from the researchers who are out there studying that specific species. And, you know, they're out there all the time watching and making observations. And sometimes researchers even track certain birds. So one thing that researchers do is will mark individuals with color bands so that we know who's who. And then this is especially useful for species where the male and female look alike, right? Because then if you put a unique color band combination on their legs, you can still tell from binoculars who you're looking at. And so this is basically just from hours and hours of observation of birds that we do know are females and they haven't been seen to sing. Good question. So really it's easier to see that a female is singing than it is to have evidence that a female doesn't sing, right? It's hard to prove a negative. So it's one of those difficult things.
Is there anyone else who has some questions? Either raise your hand or unmute your mic and ask away.
Do female swamp sparrows sing?
That is a good question. So it was actually funny when I was approached and asked to do this workshop. I did say, well, in both of the species that I study, actually, the females don't sing. So no, female swamp sparrows do not sing that we know of. There was one report from several decades ago of a song sparrow female singing, but it was kind of one person said it and there's no documentation of it. And song sparrows and swamp sparrows are very closely related. And so it's possible that the females sing sometimes. We just aren't sure because they look like the males. But that right now, the answer is no.
Someone else with a question? I have one, Katie and Monique.
Hmm.
Of the 2 or 3 or 4 warblers that we're anticipating arriving here in our area, which females sing? That we, that when I listen, I like, or I say, okay, I mean, I know like the chestnut-sided, I'll give you one. I know the chestnut-sided, the female sings. So now I have to go, well, who was singing?
Yeah, it's tough. I think a lot of warbler species have females that sing. And so it kind of just depends which one you're specifically interested in. So on that resources list, one of the links on there, I think it's the last bullet pointed link, is actually a spreadsheet that will give you a list of species in one column. And the other column is, do the females sing, basically yes or no. And so if you have any questions about specific species, I would suggest checking on there. Now, this is not an exhaustive list of all of the species you might be interested in, and that's just because we haven't documented all of the species that are here yet. And so if there's something that's not on that list is, I think, from 2014, so it's also not fully updated, but it's very possible that it's just not documented yet and we're not sure. But check out that list. And I can paste that again in the chat in case you didn't grab it yet.
That'd be good to do. And we have a couple more questions, Katie. Ruth, do you want to unmute your mic and ask your question? And then Laura Beltran has a question.
Janice, Ruth's mic is not working.
Okay, all right, see that, geez. Okay, Ruth's question is, are the functions of the female songs the same as the males? And then she says, some species, of course, have multiple songs. I assume most of this data is male. Any info on females? So the bingo is, are the functions the same?
Yeah, these are all good questions. So for the most part, it's not 100% known yet why exactly the females are using those songs, but mainly we think that it is the same reasons why the males are singing, and that is territory defense mainly, and also for mate choice. And so traditionally we've thought of mate choice again as being the female choosing the male, but it's very possible that especially in these species where both the male and the female take care of the babies, that, it would make sense for the male to pick a high quality female as well. And so also mate choice, going the other direction. And so they do have similar functions to the males. And then as far as multiple song types, that is something that researchers are still looking into as far as what exactly does the repertoire of females look like compared to the males. I believe for some species, the females, the songs in general are less complex and they might have fewer song types. They also tend to sing less often and less loudly, but those are just some kind of suggestions or things that we have some ideas on, but it hasn't been widely studied in a bunch of species just yet. But those are good questions.
And Laura has a question. You want to unmute your mic, Laura, and ask?
Sure. I was just curious, Katie. I had heard that at Fitzgerald Lake Conservation Area in Northampton, there was someone studying swamp sparrows. I was wondering if you were that person.
Yes, that was me.
Oh, great. Okay. Okay. Thank you for answering that. I was just curious.
Yes, there are so many swamp sparrows there. My lab had historically only used a site at the Quabbin, but I was, just looking around eBird, and I noted that people kept eBirding swamp sparrows at Lake Fitzgerald, and like many of them at a time, not just like one singing. And so I had to go check it out. And when I visited there, particularly the wildlife blind area, there are so many different territories in that open marsh area and extending farther north. And so I did spend a lot of time at Lake Fitzgerald. Although my fieldwork for that project is over now, so you won't see me out there this summer.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And we have another question from Melissa. Melissa, you want to, sometimes your mic works, sometimes it doesn't. So you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, can you hear me, Janice?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
So I'm just curious because I love Don Kreutzma's work, and although I haven't read the entire book, The Singing Life of Birds, what I remember, his research indicates that birds learn song while they're, is it in vitro, in the egg, right? And so my hypothesis is, like, couldn't we assume then those baby birds hear their mothers singing even softly? This is my wild imagination while they're sitting on the nest. And I think his research kind of indicated that. And I didn't know if you knew about that, or if we had any indication there's some research out there saying birds learn song while they're still in the egg.
Yeah, so this is a really great question, and this is much more close actually to what my particular research topic is. So I can probably talk more than anybody wants to hear about this, but briefly, so my recollection of Don Kreutzma's work is basically that he showed that birds learn their songs and they have dialects and all that fun stuff. But at the time that he published that book, The Singing Life of Birds, right? We basically, as a field, by we, I mean people who, I was like a child at the time, but those earlier researchers thought that songbirds actually learn their songs when they're fledglings. So it's the age is different in different species, but about 3 weeks of age, very soon after they fledge, is when they start to memorize the songs that they're going to then sing as adults. But you are correct that birds can categorize different sounds, like they can recognize their mom versus a different individual when they're in the egg. And also there's studies that have shown that for example, in zebra finches that live in Australia in these arid, hot environments, in years that are more hot than others, the parents will do these heat incubation calls, what they're being called. And then if the chicks hear those while they're in the egg, then they will grow faster and they will fledge sooner than chicks that don't hear those incubation calls. There's also some evidence that in birds that are parasitized by brood parasites. So a brood parasite is a bird that lays its egg in another bird's nest. In host species, there's also some evidence that the moms will give these incubation calls to the eggs before they hatch. And the her chicks will kind of learn that and use that as their begging call after they hatch. But the brood parasite egg, which isn't supposed to be in the nest, won't sing those same or won't give those same begging calls. And so she'll be able to pick out which one is not her chick. And so there's a whole kind of growing body of evidence that the little baby birds, even when they're embryos, are affected by sounds in the egg. And so they can learn calls, their begging calls from the females while they're sitting on the nest, but they're not learning their songs just yet.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Last questions? Well, If not, I don't see anybody putting anything in the chat or raising their hand or unmuting their mic. Thank you so much, Katie and Monique. This was really fabulous. A whole new thing for, I think, all of us to think about. And now when I hear some of those warblers, like the chestnut said it, I now know I have to look and see, who is this? Is this the male or female? And likewise with the common yellowthroat. It's another one where the female sings. So hats off to both of you. This was really fabulous. Thank you. And I don't know if you're looking in the chat box, there are lots of thank yous and appreciation from people who were participating.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me and for listening to me talk about birdsong, which is one of my favorite things.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.